Before the world knew her as Edith Wharton, the best-selling author, she was born Edith Newbold Jones in a New York brownstone at 14 West 23rd Street in 1862. Born into a privilege many could only dream of, she belonged to a family rooted deeply in old New York. Despite her indifference to the social rituals, customs of the elite, Edith's mother insisted on raising her daughter as a proper society lady, and as such, was expected to procure the ever-important title for a woman in her day, that being the title of wife. Wharton officially came out as a debutante to society in 1879. She was allowed to bare her shoulders and wear her hair up for the first time at a December dance, which was given by a society matron, Anna Morton. She wore a pale green brocade dress with a white muslin skirt, carried a bouquet of lilies of the valley, and suffered an agony of shyness. Her parents scheduled her coming out a year earlier than was conventional, at 17, because, she wrote, "They decided I spent too much time in reading." Making the rounds of dances and parties in Newport and New York, she observed the rituals of her privileged surroundings. While she was of society, the bookish Wharton did not easily fit into the confines of her world. She rejected the standards of fashion and etiquette that were expected of young girls at the time, which were intended to allow women to marry well and to be put on display at balls and parties. She considered these fashions superficial and oppressive. Wharton wanted more education than she received, so she read from her father's library and from the libraries of her father's friends. Her mother forbade her to read novels until she was married, and Edith obeyed this command. An unenthusiastic debutante, Edith carried on as society expected her, and spent much of her time socializing and meeting eligible men, doing her best to appear as marriage material. In her autobiography, Wharton reported that she was a self-conscious adolescent, much less pretty than many of the girls, and less quick at the uptake than the young men. Because Edith was not considered beautiful by society's standards, and her family did not have a lot of money, many of her peers did not see her as a desirable future wife. The cards may have been stacked against her in this aspect, but after all, she was a Jones. Edith's family had been in New York for over 2 centuries, and thus were cemented in New York's high society, which to many was more valuable than money itself. Soon enough, 2 or 3 young men were honoring the young red-headed debutante with their devotion, one of which in particular caught Edith's eye. A sporty member of the Newport Circle, 3 years her senior, who went by the name Henry Layden Stevens. He had spent some time at Oxford University and elsewhere in England, returning without a degree, but with the equipment to lay out Newport's first lawn tennis court. His late father, Perron Stevens, had been a co-owner of the Fifth Avenue Hotel, opposite the Joneses' New York home. His mother, Marietta, the daughter of a grocer from Lowell, Massachusetts, was known as a social climber. The two would spend much time together over the next couple years. In 1880, Edith's older brother, Frederick Jones, and his wife Mary were putting the finishing touches on Reef Point, their new summer house on the shore path in the Maine seaside town of Bar Harbor. Their architects were a leading Boston firm, Roch and Tilden, who were to be designers of a number of Bar Harbor's grander estates. That same summer, the senior Joneses and young Edith forsook their usual Newport season, spending it instead at Bar Harbor. Henry accompanied them, causing many to speculate the couple were engaged. although friends, who called him her shadow, felt it would not last. The Joneses' next 2 summers were spent in Europe, where it was hoped that the climate would prove beneficial to Edith's father's health. It did not. Her father died of a stroke in Cannes in 1882. Stevens was there in Europe at the time to offer comfort to Edith and her family. After returning to the United States with her mother, Edith continued her courtship with Henry. Their engagement was officially announced in the Newport Daily News on August 19, 1882. The groom's name appeared in the announcement before the bride's, which was not the custom at the time, perhaps indicating Marietta Stevens' hand in the engagement notice. By now, the social climber was an expert in managing the newspapers. She knew the value of the Stevens name taking prime position. Henry was said to be desperately in love with the intelligent and quick-witted Edith, who, as a Jones, came from the kind of old New York stock that would render the Stevensons' transfer from nouveau riche to part of the establishment complete. Although not from an as prestigious family as Edith, in many ways, Henry Stevens was a catch. He was attractive, sporty, charismatic, one of the most popular men in society, and due to inherit a large fortune that his father had left when he died. From society's point of view, it appeared to be the perfect match, but it seems that not all the respective families were in agreement. The Joneses family did not approve, and oddly enough, neither did Henry's mother. That fall, the month the two were to marry, the betrothal was broken off. Edith's family accused Marietta of being behind it all, surmising that she was looking for a bride with more attractive prospects than Edith for her only son. Helen Rhinelander, Edith's cousin, wrote in a letter to her brother Tom, "It is evidently Mrs. S.'s fault, or rather she is the cause. I doubt Edith and H. have changed in their feeling for one another, but that Mrs. S. is at the bottom of it all." For their part, the Joneses let it be known that they thought that Marietta would make an impossible mother-in-law, and still harbored suspicions that the social climbing Stevens were not quite good enough to be associated with their name. The broken engagement caused a public stir, particularly in society pages of newspapers in New York and Newport. The gossip sheet Town Topics reported, "The only reason for the breaking of the engagement is an alleged preponderance of intellectuality on the part of the intended bride." Mortified, Edith returned to Europe with her mother, where, curiously, in a letter from the spring of 1883, Edith says that Stevens once again visited the Joneses in Cannes. "Mr. Stevens gave me such a pretty ring for Easter, a black and white pearl." She wrote this 5 months after it was reported that she was too clever to be his bride. Whatever the reasons for the split, the Joneses were ready to put the sad events behind them, and the following year, the two returned to New York for the season, bracing themselves for the inevitable stares from society's matrons. As the season came and went with no suitors to speak of, Mrs. Jones took Edith once again to Bar Harbor for the summer. With less rigid chaperoning of young people than Newport, Bar Harbor was considered an ideal spot for romance. It is no wonder that against this backdrop, Edith would truly fall in love for the first time. Before Edith could even unpack her bags, she was soon spending all her time with a flourishing lawyer. Walter Berry, who was staying the summer at the Rodick Hotel, was introduced to Edith as the son of an old friend of her family's. Berry descended from the wealthy New York State Van Rensselaers, and stood to inherit a small fortune from his mother. He went to St. Mark's and to Harvard, and took a law degree at Columbia. Edith was now 21, shy yet precocious, still in the grip of her aristocratic family. He was 24, tall, elegant, and well-read. Edith spent the early weeks of the summer with him, canoeing, hiking, and cycling. In Walter, Edith found a man she could talk to about books, art, and history, a man who shared her intellectual enthusiasms and enlivened her spirit. In her autobiography, A Backward Glance, she described their summer together as a fleeting hint of what the communion of kindred intelligences might be. Their budding romance was cut short, however. Without a proposal, Barry left suddenly for Washington, D.C. to pursue law. And the two would not meet again until the 1890s in Newport. But no matter, for on the scene appeared an old friend of Edith's older brother Harry, Edward, better known as Teddy Wharton, a 33-year-old gentleman and sportsman. Though he had known Edith since childhood, it was that summer at Bar Harbor that he began to pay her court. Teddy belonged to the same social class as the Joneses. He came from a very respectable, well-established Boston family of some means, which afforded him a life of leisure. Teddy spent most of his time traveling and attending parties. He was handsome, lively, quite popular, and in the whirlwind, swept the author right off her feet. Edith wrote, "He was 13 years older than myself, but the difference in age was lessened by his natural youthfulness, his good humor and gaiety, and the fact that he shared my love of animals and outdoor life, and would soon catch my travel fever." 2 years later, Edith, aged now 23, and rapidly approaching old maid status, was at last to be married. Edith still had a chance at marriage and retaining her standing. Though she had been shamed by her first engagement, she was still a Jones, and therefore remained a desirable match. Teddy Wharton's family did not have nearly the amount of money that Edith's family did. However, Edith's age and previous scandal from her failed engagement, combined with her vulnerability after losing Barry, made her an attainable bride. On April 29, 1885, Edith married Teddy in a modest noontime ceremony at Trinity Chapel on West 25th Street. Edith wore white satin with lace and silk mull. On her mass of hair, securing the veil, rested the diamond tiara that had been worn by her mother on her wedding day, enhanced with diamonds given to Edith by Teddy, reported the New York Times. The wedding was a very quiet one, and the invitations were limited to the immediate relatives of the two families. A bridal party breakfast was later served across the street at 28 West 25th Street, between 6th and Broadway, the home Edith and her mother shared following the death of her father in 1882. The new bride was excited to start their life together. Teddy was a very kind soul, particularly in the beginning of their marriage. In an 1885 letter to her governess, Edith wrote, "It seems almost incredible that a man can be so devoted, so generous, so sweet-tempered and unselfish. He is one of the people whose charm makes itself felt at once." Edith's mother adored her son-in-law, describing him as sunshine in their home. The newlyweds set up house at Pencraig Cottage in Newport. In 1893, they relocated to a house named Land's End, on the other side of Newport, paying $80,000 for the property. Edith decorated Land's End with the help of designer Ogden Codman. In 1897, the Whartons purchased their New York home, 884 Park Avenue. Edith and Teddy would split their time between their two homes in New York City and Newport. The couple filled their early married years with travel and outdoor sport, ice skating, bicycling, horseback riding, and Edith continued to write. Because of their shared love for Europe, she and Teddy traveled abroad as often as they could. Between 1886 and 1897, they traveled overseas at least 4 months of each year, from February to June, mainly visiting Italy, but also Paris and England. Their friend, Egerton Winthrop, accompanied them on many journeys there. In 1888, the Whartons and their friend, James Van Allen, chartered a 333-ton steam yacht with a crew of 16 and took a cruise through the Aegean Islands. Edith was 26. The trip cost the Whartons $10,000 and lasted 4 months. During this trip, she kept a travel journal that was thought to be lost, but was later published as The Cruise of the Vanadies, now considered her earliest known travel writing. Though she recounted the regular travels during its early years to England, France, and Italy as the time when she really felt alive, Edith soon found Teddy to be a weight around her neck. The couple was said to be unmatched emotionally, physically, and intellectually, and shared few interests and similarities. Teddy wanted to live in Newport. Edith did not. Edith was incredibly intellectually inclined, while Teddy was much more interested in sports. Within a few years, he had transformed into a homebody, using weak health as an excuse to cut London visits short, even as Edith's novels were being celebrated there. And when Edith found she was making strides in her writing in the country, Teddy would experience a burst of energy and insist on returning to the city. In her darkest words on their marriage, Edith wrote, "It is always depressing to live with the dissatisfied." The two certainly did not dislike each other, yet as a couple they did not mesh. On the death of her mother in 1901, Edith was left an inheritance, which the couple used to build a large home in Lenox, Massachusetts, named the Mount. The money also allowed them to visit Europe more often. But soon their days of traveling would be behind them. Teddy, who had inherited a family susceptibility to mental illness, suffered from chronic depression and alcoholism from the late 1880s to 1902. Edith was also said to suffer from periods of depression during those same years. From then on, they lived almost exclusively at their estate, the Mount, which they would only call home for a decade. Edith wrote the majority of her literary works here in Lenox at the time. The House of Mirth was published in 1905, and Ethan Frome in 1911. Up to this point, the Whartons were living off Edith's inheritance. As Edith became more well known as a writer, her earnings soon took over as their main source of income. Teddy had difficulty finding a role for himself in the marriage. Having no real work of his own, Teddy was largely dependent on Edith for money. He loved his wife very much, and he supported her writing as best he could, but Teddy did not fully appreciate her genius. The amiable outdoorsman felt foolish among her sophisticated friends, and generally excluded from the interests that drove her life. Slowly, he began to feel like a mere passenger in her fast-moving world. And as time went on, his mental afflictions became more extreme. He became irritable and sometimes irresponsible. He started openly flaunting his affairs, which appear to date from 1907. Although Edith was pained and embarrassed by his flagrant disregard of appearances, she tried to pass off his behavior with humor. On a motor trip with a friend, Edith was signing into a hotel in a town she had never before visited, when she noticed an entry on the register, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Wharton. She observed with a slight smile and shrug, "Evidently, I have been here before." Sometimes, when Teddy had difficulty meeting the expenses of his mistresses, he helped himself to funds that Edith had entrusted to his care. Though irritated by his behavior, she felt compassion for his situation, as she revealed in a late summing up. There was no cruelty and no unkindness in him, yet he was cruel and unkind through weakness. She tried to find him effective psychiatric help, but by 1907, Teddy's nervous illness, his swings between depression and mania, were obvious and hard to bear. He became a danger to Edith, so much so that doctors and friends suggested they separate. But in spite of this and her independent income, Wharton, like most women of her time and set, could still be undercut by a divorce. Edith still belonged to the world of old New York, and this was a circle where divorce was unthinkable. Increasingly, the marriage seemed to her an intolerable prison. Taking a page from one of her own novels, like many of her characters, Edith Wharton would make use of concealment, reserve, and deception in her own life. In that year, Edith herself found comfort in the arms of another. Fittingly, the sparks of an affair were ignited in the city of Paris, far removed from our homes in New York and New England. For the most part, Wharton's Paris was grounded on the other side of the Seine, in a neighborhood village known as the Faubourg Saint-Germain, in the 7th arrondissement. With its private mansions hidden behind the walls and doors, it was grand, formal, and difficult for outsiders to access. Edith loved attending the Tuesday night salons of the widowed Countess Rosa de Fitzjames, here at 142 Rue de Grenelle. Now this was Embassy. One night, in early 1907, a dashing, well-tailored man with a large Victorian mustache and languid eyes was among the attendees. Younger than Edith by a few years, William Morton Fullerton was a Frenchified, well-read American cad who worked as the Paris correspondent for the London Times. That first meeting, Morton told Edith that he'd read and enjoyed The House of Mirth, and impressed Edith by asking about her character, Lily Bart. In a letter to a friend, Wharton states that she found Fullerton to be very intelligent. However, even from the outset, she sensed that he had an air of mysteriousness about him. Fullerton, it seems, had a bit of a sordid past. He had moved to Paris to leave a messy and entangled life behind him. In London, Fullerton moved easily in the Edwardian elite. With his overwhelming charm, he attracted a host of friends and relations. In 1903, he was briefly married to an opera singer, Camille Chabert. The following year, Chabert divorced Fullerton because she could not tolerate his affairs. He was involved simultaneously with at least 2 other French women, a minor actress whose stage name was Madame Mirecourt, and Hélène Pouget, an artist's model from Nîmes. Wharton's disapproving and concerned friends referred to Fullerton as an elegant seducer, a libertine, and a middle-aged, mustached Lothario. Alas, Wharton was entirely taken under his spell. She couldn't wait to see Morton again, but Edith would have to wait. Discretion prevailed. When a mutual friend, Henry James, came for an extended visit at Edith's, Morton dropped by as often as he could. Edith and Morton finally had a private get-to-know-you walk through Edith's posh Left Bank neighborhood. The sun splashing itself along the high-walled Hotel Particuliers of the Rue de Varennes. During the early stages of her friendship with Fullerton, Edith Wharton returned each spring to her home in Lenox, Massachusetts. That summer, the palatial home added a new name to its guest list. Morton, who was in the country visiting family, extended his trip to call on the Whartons. Fullerton was helping Edith to place a translation of The House of Mirth in the Revue des Deux Mondes. A moment of intimacy passed between them during his stay. From that point on, Edith started to keep a private journal where she would document her relationship with Fullerton. That December, Edith returned to Paris, where her feelings for Morton continued to blossom. The setting was both beautiful and logistically enabling for her romance, which she kept secret from both her husband and her circle of friends. Theirs was a discreet adultery, noted one of Edith's biographers. It worked in Paris in a way that it never would have in America. She and Fullerton plotted their encounters via a furious exchange of brief notes, delivered often several times a day by the Paris postal system. At the Louvre, at 1 o'clock in the shadow of Diana, she wrote in one note. Wharton's relationship with Fullerton worked particularly well when they acted as ordinary tourists. They would go to the theater, like the Marine, and often dined together at restaurants in obscure corners of the left bank, which she described as the end of the earth, where there is bad food and no chance of meeting acquaintances. They snuck off on long walks through Montmartre, the Tuileries, and Luxembourg Gardens, and took daring trips outside of Paris. One day they headed by car west of Paris to the fortress town of Montfort-à-Maury. They visit the Saint Pierre Church with its 16th century stained glass windows and viewed the forest of Rambouillet below. On another occasion, Wharton and Fullerton took the train to Senlis, north of Paris. The lovers wandered through the narrow cobblestone streets, lined with medieval and Renaissance houses. They visited the 12th century Gothic Notre Dame Cathedral and had an early dinner in town. On the train back, Wharton later wrote in her secret diary, "I knew then, dearest dear, all that I had never known before, the interfusion of spirit and sense, the double nearness, the mingled communion of touch and thought." To show his devotion, instead of flowers, Morton would surprise Edith with a pale green box of macarons from Ladurée, the pastry shop on Rue Royale. After a long, romantic winter, the Vanderbilt lease was up, and it was time for Edith to return to the United States. Before her ship set sail, Edith spent a few weeks at her brother's townhouse at Place des États Unis, on the right bank. where Morton came to visit her. On her return to the Mount in 1908, Edith found her old life almost unbearable. This time, Edith was missing Fullerton terribly. She wrote letters regularly to him, letters brimming with emotion. But Fullerton had become distant and unreliable. He gradually lost interest in the affair, and by 1910 it was over. Wharton could not help but feel a sense of anticlimax and betrayal. Because they shared mutual friends, they often attended the same social events, at which they were forced to interact. It is these mundane exchanges which seem to disappoint Edith the most. After the affair ended, Wharton, who was fiercely guarded when it came to her private life, requested that Fullerton destroy every letter she had ever sent him in order to avoid any scandal. Fullerton had ignored this request and kept all of her letters, which were eventually published as a book, The Letters of Edith Wharton, in 1988. The affair now behind her, Edith focused her attention on the matter of her marriage, which was disintegrating amid scandal and chaos. Unbeknownst to Edith, Teddy had embezzled nearly $50,000 from her trust to fund a Boston apartment for his mistress and the pleasure of several chorus girls. The sun had at last set on the Whartons' marriage. Edith let go of Teddy and let go of the Mount, handing the deed over to him in exchange for her freedom. By the time her boat arrived in France, the house had been sold. After many unhappy years of marriage, Wharton divorced her husband in the courts of Paris in 1913, avoiding the public nature of the American court system. After her divorce came through, Edith found herself on her own. She decided to stay on in Paris, where she had taken up a permanent residence in 1909. But Edith was never really alone. By this time, she had built around herself a society of intellectual men. The most durable and comfortable of all her male relationships was with her old flame, Walter Berry. After their initial meeting that summer in Maine, the two would reunite in the late 1890s. He was then 37. R.W.B. Lewis described him as a tall, slender man with a well-trimmed mustache, owning a reputation for urbanity, a range of humanistic learning, and a habit of mildly lewd fastidiousness. A persistent gallant and a confirmed bachelor, who was much in demand in Washington society. Walter became her devoted literary advisor and cheerleader at a time when Edith was insecure about her ability to write. Meanwhile, her husband, Teddy, was declaring, "Amazing that someone so slim-waisted could also possess literary talent." Walter protected her from Teddy's bouts of mania near the end of their marriage, even moving into their apartment in Paris to act as an intermediary. Looked after her through numerous depressive spells, including a sort of identity crisis at age 32, and gave Edith her treasured copy of Leaves and Grass, inscribing it, "I follow you, whoever you are, from the present hour," taken from the poem Song of Myself. After her divorce in 1913, she and Barry faced the world very much like a couple, though they never married or even revealed the precise extent of their relationship. After her divorce, Wharton and Barry's friends assumed the two were more than friends and that he would propose, but no one knew for certain, and he never did propose. Instead, Barry toured around war-torn Europe with Wharton, while maintaining his bachelor lifestyle in Paris. With nearly all of their correspondence destroyed, their relationship remains one shrouded in mystery. But a few crumbs remain. The most tantalizing is a 1923 postcard in which Walter reminisces about their time together in Maine. "Dearest, the real dream, mine, was in the canoe and in the night afterwards. For I lay awake wondering and wondering, and then when morning came, wondering how I could have wondered. I, a penniless lawyer, not even that yet, with just enough cash for the canoe and for Roderick's bill. And then later, in the little cottage Newport, I wondered why I hadn't, for it would have been good. And the slices of years slid by. Well, my dear, I've never wondered about anyone else, and there wouldn't be much of me if you were cut out of it. 40 years of it is you, dear. W." On his death in October 1927, Wharton wrote in her diary, "The love of all my life died today, and I with him." To one of her friends she wrote, "No words can tell of my desolation. He had been to me in turn all that one being can be to another, in love, in friendship, in understanding." In her will, Wharton stipulated that she should be buried next to Walter at the Cimetière des Gonards, Versailles. Wharton's publicly expressed devotion to Barry, her desire to be buried near him, and her desolation at his death in 1927 indicate that she regarded him as her life companion. The themes that encompass Wharton's writing, silent longing, chances lost, words never spoken, all seem to trace the enigmatic figure of Walter Barry. Perhaps this is what contributed to her success as a writer. Wharton's tragic love life gave her the experience that allowed her to create some of the most beautiful and tragic romances ever written.